My name is Allison, 33 years old and a forensic accountant who spent her entire life balancing the books for a family that viewed me as nothing more than a human ATM. At our extravagant family Christmas party, I had just finished cooking the morning appetizers, setting up the garden decorations, and swiping my own credit card to pay the massive catering bill. Right before the main dinner, my father raised his glass in front of 40 wealthy neighbors and looked dead at me. "Now you are just a guest in this family," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do not overstep." My mother nodded in agreement. My younger sister looked away with a smug smile. I did not say a single word. I simply stood up, walked into the kitchen, and calmly took back every single thing they took for granted. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and abused your generosity. Growing up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, maintaining appearances was the only religion my parents Richard and Patricia truly practiced. Our sprawling colonial home was a monument to their obsession with status. But behind closed doors, the financial reality was a fragile house of cards, and I was the one constantly expected to keep it from collapsing. I was the responsible older sister, the practical one who chose a stable career, investigating financial fraud, instead of relying on someone else. My sister Courtney, on the other hand, was the golden child. At 30 years old, she still played the role of the delicate princess who needed constant rescuing. When she married Jamal, a flashy but struggling real estate agent who spent more time posting luxury cars on social media than actually closing property deals, my parents treated him like royalty. The annual Christmas party was the absolute highlight of my parents' social calendar. They invited the entire Homeowners Association board, local politicians, and influential members of their exclusive country club. Of course, they expected a flawless and opulent event, but conveniently lacked the actual funds to pay for it. That was where I always came in. I had arrived at 7 in the morning in the freezing cold to coordinate the decorators, arrange the elaborate floral centerpieces, and manage the hired waitstaff. Around 6 in the evening, as guests mingled with expensive cocktails, the head caterer approached me with a panicked look. He quietly explained that my father's credit card had just been declined for the second time. To avoid a massive public scene and protect my parents' pride, I quietly pulled out my own premium corporate card and authorized the $4,500 payment for the prime rib dinner and the top-tier open bar. Not even 20 minutes later, the guests were seated at the beautifully decorated tables scattered across our heated patio. My father Richard stood up and tapped his crystal champagne flute with a heavy silver spoon. The yard fell instantly silent as he draped his arm around Jamal and Courtney. "My friends," he began, his chest puffed out with immense pride. "This year brings the greatest gift of all. Courtney and Jamal are expecting their first child." The affluent crowd erupted into polite applause and cheers. I smiled, genuinely, actually happy for my sister despite our endless differences. But my father held up his hand to quiet the crowd. "And to ensure our first grandchild grows up with the exact same wonderful memories we built here, Patricia and I have decided to gift this entire estate to Courtney and Jamal. The deed will be officially transferred to them next week." I felt the blood drain completely from my face. I had been quietly paying their exorbitant property taxes for the last 2 years just to keep the county from placing a lien on the house. I shifted in my seat, accidentally letting out a small, audible scoff. My father instantly zeroed in on me. The fake warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, warning glare. He pointed his glass directly at me in front of everyone. "Now you are just a guest in this family, Allison," he said, his voice loud, sharp, and deliberate. "Do not overstep. It is not your place to judge your sister's blessings." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. 40 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. My mother Patricia gave me a stern look of deep disapproval, nodding along to my father's cruel words. Jamal smirked, wrapping his arm protectively around Courtney, who was feigning innocence by looking down at her lap. A hot wave of public humiliation washed over me, but my analytical mind quickly took over the emotion. A guest. I repeated the word in my head. Guests do not pay $4,500 for dinner. I stood up slowly from my chair. I did not throw a tantrum, argue, or shed a single tear. I simply smoothed out my dress, walked straight past the stunned guests, and entered the kitchen. I found the head caterer packing the heated serving trays. "Stop serving," I told him calmly and firmly. "I am the one who signed the contract and paid the invoice. Box up every single piece of food and load it back into your trucks right now. Leave nothing but the empty plates." The caterer, sensing the absolute unwavering authority in my voice, nodded and quickly instructed his crew to pack up. I grabbed my coat, walked out the front door, and drove away into the freezing winter night, leaving 40 elite guests sitting at perfectly set tables waiting for a grand feast that would never arrive. The drive back to my city apartment took 45 minutes. For the first 10 minutes, the silence inside my car was absolute, accompanied only by the hum of the heater fighting off the December chill. Then my phone began to vibrate in the cup holder. It buzzed once, then twice, and within seconds it was a continuous angry spasm of notifications illuminating the dark cabin. I did not pull over. I kept my eyes focused firmly on the highway, letting the calls roll to voicemail one after another. When I finally parked in my building's secure garage, my notification screen was a wall of red alerts. There were 14 missed calls, 20 text messages, and 5 voicemails. I turned off the engine, reclined my seat slightly, and tapped the first voicemail icon. It was Jamal. His voice boomed through my car speakers, dripping with his usual unearned arrogance and aggressive entitlement. "Listen to me very closely, Allison." Jamal snarled into the phone, the noise of panicking guests audible behind him. "You have completely lost your mind. Who do you think you are, pulling a stunt like that? You ruined my wife's pregnancy announcement because you are a bitter spinster who cannot stand to see us happy. We are building a family and a legacy here. You only have your spreadsheets and your empty apartment. You owe Courtney a massive apology, and you better write a check to that caterer right now before I come down there and make you fix this. Do not ever disrespect my family." I listened to the entire recording without my heart rate elevating a single beat. Legacy. That was a rich word coming from a man whose last 3 commercial real estate deals had completely collapsed and who was currently leasing a Porsche Cayenne with money I had foolishly lent him 2 years ago to keep his business afloat. He called it an angel investment. I knew it was a desperate bailout. I deleted Jamal's voicemail and opened my text messages. My mother, Patricia, had sent a rapid-fire sequence of texts, each one more dramatic than the last. "You have completely disgraced the family name," the first message read. The HOA president and the country club board members were sitting right there. "How could you embarrass your father and me like this? We gave you everything." Courtney is crying hysterically in her bedroom. "You are deeply unwell, Allison. We expect you to transfer the money for the catering directly into our account by tomorrow morning so we can at least salvage the brunch. Do not contact us until you are ready to grovel." Grovel. The sheer audacity of that word hung heavily in the air of my quiet car. For my entire adult life, I had been the silent financial safety net. I paid the property taxes when my father claimed his investments were temporarily tied up. I covered the country club dues so my mother could maintain her social standing among the Connecticut elite. I even paid for Courtney's extravagant destination wedding in Mexico because Jamal insisted on a luxury aesthetic he absolutely could not afford. I had justified it all under the guise of being a good, supportive daughter. I was a forensic accountant who spent her days uncovering financial fraud for corporate clients, yet I had completely ignored the emotional extortion happening in my own family. No more. I did not text my mother back. I did not call Jamal to defend myself against his ridiculous insults. Instead, I opened my banking application on my phone. The biometric scan verified my identity and my financial dashboard loaded instantly. I navigated straight to the authorized users section of my primary platinum credit card. 3 years ago, my parents had convinced me to issue them a card tied to my account for absolute emergencies only. My father claimed it was just for peace of mind regarding medical expenses as they got older. Over the past 6 months, those absolute emergencies had somehow included a $4,000 golf simulator for the basement routine, Botox appointments for Patricia, and ironically, the very designer maternity clothes Courtney was currently wearing. They were living a six-figure lifestyle on my dime, while treating me like an annoying servant they could dismiss at will. I stared at the screen, specifically targeting the button labeled Manage Authorized Users. My thumb hovered over my parents' names. There was a brief flicker of conditioned guilt, a lingering ghost of the dutiful daughter they had trained me to be. But then I heard my father's voice echoing in my head. Now you are just a guest in this family. Do not overstep. He was absolutely right. Guests do not fund the lavish lifestyles of their hosts. I pressed the button. I revoked my father's access. I revoked my mother's access. A green checkmark appeared on the screen, confirming the cards had been permanently deactivated. I felt an immediate rushing sense of lightness. It was the absolute cleanest financial cut I had ever made in my life. I locked my phone, stepped out of my car, and walked confidently toward the elevator. Let them try to buy their way out of their own mess tomorrow. Tuesday morning arrived with a bitter chill covering the city windows. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping my black coffee, and reviewing a complex corporate embezzlement file when the heavy oak door of my apartment suddenly rattled under violent pounding. The aggressive knocking echoed loudly through my quiet living room. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall. Standing in the hallway were my father Richard and my brother-in-law Jamal glaring at my door. They had somehow bypassed the lobby concierge, likely by tailgating another resident into the secure elevator. Jamal slammed his fist against the wood again. "Open the door right now, Allison," he shouted, his voice muffled but furious. "We know you are in there. Do not play games with us." I set my coffee mug down. I did not feel fear, only a profound sense of exhaustion washing over me. I walked over to the console table, picked up a single sheet of paper I had printed the night before, and unbolted the deadbolt. I opened the door just a few inches, leaving the heavy brass chain securely fastened. My father immediately pushed his hand against the doorframe, trying to force it wider. "Allison, this childish temper tantrum ends right now," he demanded, using the exact same authoritative tone he used to scold me when I was a teenager. "You humiliated us on Christmas and now you have frozen the family emergency card. Your mother was publicly embarrassed at the spa this morning when her payment declined. Turn the account back on immediately, or there will be serious consequences." Jamal shoved his way past my father, his face flushed. "Forget the stupid spa," Jamal snapped, pointing a finger at my face through the narrow opening. "Courtney is at home having a panic attack because the interior designer for the nursery needs the deposit today. You are going to unfreeze that account right now, and you are going to write us a check for $10,000 to cover the baby room and the catering mess you caused. You owe my wife that much after the humiliating stunt you pulled at the party." I looked at Jamal, studying his expensive designer coat and the gold watch flashing on his wrist. Then I looked at my father, whose face was turning purple from righteous indignation. They honestly believed they could just bully me into compliance. They thought the old Allison, the obedient ATM machine, would just cry apologize and hand over the cash to keep the peace. Instead of answering, I slid the single piece of paper through the crack in the door. Jamal snatched it aggressively. It was a formal bank confirmation letter stating that the authorized user accounts under the names Richard and Patricia had been permanently closed. "What is this?" my father demanded, trying to read the paper over Jamal's shoulder. "That is your reality check," I said, my voice steady and cold. "The account is not frozen. It is permanently canceled. There will be no more spa days on my dime. There will be no $10,000 checks for a nursery, and there will certainly be no more funding your ridiculous charades." Jamal crumpled the paper in his fist. "Are you out of your mind?" he yelled. We are family. You have millions sitting in your accounts. 10 grand is absolutely nothing to you. We desperately need that money, Allison. I have massive business deals closing next month, but I need liquid cash right now. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Business deals, Jamal? You mean like the supposed commercial property venture you pitched me 2 years ago? I leaned closer to the crack in the door, staring directly into his eyes. Let us talk about liquid cash. How about the $50,000 I gave you to keep your real estate empire afloat? I know exactly where every single penny of that money went. It went straight to the down payment and the monthly lease on that Porsche Cayenne you parked downstairs. You are driving a car paid for by my retirement fund. Do not ever stand in front of my door and demand another cent from me ever again. Jamal's jaw dropped. My father opened his mouth to intervene, but I held up my hand to stop him. You told me I was just a guest, Dad? I said, looking right at him. Well, guests do not pay for the host's bad financial decisions. Now you have exactly 60 seconds to leave my floor. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed the front desk. Yes, security, I said loudly enough for them to hear. I have 2 men trespassing on the 14th floor right now. They bypassed the front desk and are currently harassing me at my door. Please send the guards up immediately to escort them off the premises. If they refuse to leave, call the police. My father looked at me like a stranger. You are destroying this family over money, he spat. No, I replied calmly. I am just cutting off your funding. I shut the door firmly and slid the deadbolt back into place. Through the heavy wood, I heard Jamal cursing loudly and my father pacing the hallway. 2 minutes later, I heard the security guards demanding they leave. I stood quietly by the door until the hallway was completely silent again. I walked back to my kitchen and went back to work. By noon, the adrenaline from the morning confrontation had faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of my forensic accounting analysis. I was tracing a shell corporation's hidden assets when my cell phone screen lit up. Then it lit up again, and again. It was a relentless cascade of Facebook notifications and text messages from extended family members who rarely bothered to contact me unless they needed free tax advice. I unlocked the phone screen. Right at the very top of my feed was a massive multi-paragraph post from my mother, Patricia. She had tagged 20 different relatives, framing the narrative exactly how she wanted it. The post was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. It breaks my heart to write this. Her post began accompanied by a black and white photo of our family from 10 years ago. As parents, Richard and I sacrificed everything to give our daughters a beautiful life. But yesterday, on the holy day of Christmas, we experienced the ultimate betrayal. Our oldest daughter, who has been blessed with immense financial wealth, decided to abandon her aging parents and her pregnant sister. She threw a tantrum over a simple misunderstanding, canceled our holiday dinner, and left us humiliated in front of our dearest friends. Worse, she has now cut off all financial support that she promised to provide for her elderly father's medical emergencies. Money truly changes people. Pray for our family, especially for poor Courtney, who is suffering terrible distress during her high-risk pregnancy. Beneath the post, the comments section was an absolute war zone of manufactured outrage. Aunt Susan wrote that she was disgusted by my greed. Uncle David commented that I should be ashamed of myself for disrespecting my parents. My older cousins chimed in, calling me a heartless corporate robot. My text messages were equally toxic. Aunt Susan slid into my direct messages. How could you be so cruel to your mother, she wrote. She was crying on the phone with me for an hour. You need to apologize and fix this right now. You make more money than all of us combined. Help your family. I stared at the glowing screen. The forensic accountant in me instantly overpowered any lingering guilt. I looked at the timeline. The post was highly calculated. It was published exactly 1 hour after my father and Jamal were kicked out of my apartment building. They had realized physical intimidation would not work, so they deployed a public smear campaign to socially pressure me into submitting. Just as I was about to mute the application, a new text message popped up. It was from Courtney. There was an image attached. I clicked on it. It was a grainy, black and white ultrasound photo of her baby. Underneath the picture was a long, emotionally weaponized paragraph. "Look at your nephew Allison," the message read. "He is the one you are hurting with your selfish behavior. My blood pressure is through the roof today, and the doctor said stress is incredibly dangerous for the baby. Jamal and I are barely holding it together because of what you did. Mom is a complete wreck. If you actually care about this baby and want to be a part of his life, you need to make things right. I already booked the country club ballroom for my baby shower next month. The deposit is $3,000. Transfer the money to Jamal's account by tonight to show you are actually sorry. If you do not, you will never see this child." I read the long message twice. The sheer audacity of using an unborn child to extort a $3,000 deposit for a luxury party was breathtaking. Courtney was not worried about her blood pressure or her baby's health. She was worried about losing her country club status and the lavish lifestyle I had been blindly funding. I did not reply to Aunt Susan's direct text. I did not comment on my mother's dramatic Facebook post to defend myself. And I certainly did not reply to Courtney's pathetic attempt at emotional blackmail. Instead, I took a screenshot of Courtney's text demanding the money. I saved it directly to a secure folder on my cloud drive labeled Family Extortion. Let them scream into the social media void. I put my phone on silent, flipped it face down on the granite counter, and turned my attention back to my computer screens. The public smear campaign was just noise. But something else was bothering me. My parents were financially irresponsible, yes, but the level of absolute desperation they were showing driving to my apartment, demanding 10 grand, weaponizing the baby for cash, felt fundamentally different. It felt exactly like panic. And in my line of work, panic always meant someone was hiding a much bigger, more catastrophic financial disaster. I pushed my phone away, letting the screen go dark, and turned my focus back to my monitors. The emotional blackmail from Courtney and the social media circus orchestrated by my mother were designed to distract me, to make me act on guilt rather than logic. But my mind was already shifting gears. In forensic accounting, you learn very quickly that loud, dramatic behavior is almost always a smokescreen for a quiet, hidden crime. People do not weaponize a pregnancy over a $3,000 deposit unless they are completely out of liquid assets and utterly desperate. Their panic was palpable, and I needed to figure out why they were suddenly drowning. But before I could dig into their financial history, I had a pressing administrative task of my own to handle. For the past 3 months, I had been in negotiations to move my independent consulting practice into a larger commercial office space downtown. The lease agreement was finalized, and my broker, a meticulously organized woman named Claire, had sent over the final digital paperwork that morning. All that remained was the standard credit verification. As someone who managed money for a living, my personal finances were immaculate. I paid off every balance monthly, maintained a diverse portfolio, and boasted a credit score that consistently hovered around 810. I clicked the link in Claire's email, filled in my social security number, authorized the hard inquiry, and hit submit without a second thought. I expected an automated approval email within 5 minutes. Instead, 15 minutes passed in absolute silence. Then my office phone rang. It was Claire. "Allison, I am so sorry to bother you." Claire began, her voice unusually tight and hesitant. "We have hit a rather strange snag with the lease application." I leaned back, frowning at the phone. "A snag? Did the landlord change the terms at the last minute?" "No, the terms are fine," Claire replied carefully. "It is your credit report. The system automatically flagged your application and issued a hard denial. I thought it was a software glitch, so I ran it manually through our secondary portal. Allison, your credit score is registering at 512. The air in my office suddenly felt very thin. I sat frozen, staring blankly at the wall. 512. That was not a minor dip from a late utility bill. That was a catastrophic freefall. That was the score of someone actively defaulting on major loans or going through a messy bankruptcy. That is impossible, I said, my voice dropping to a serious register. My score is over 800. I have zero debt outside of my regular monthly expenses. There has to be a clerical error. Someone has mixed up my social security number with another person. I assumed as much, Claire said, sounding relieved that I was not panicking. But the system is showing several major derogatory marks tied directly to your file. You need to pull your comprehensive report from all 3 major bureaus immediately. The landlord will not hold the office space for more than 48 hours, with a flagged application. I will handle it right now, I told her, hanging up the phone. My hands moved over the keyboard with practiced rapid precision. I bypassed the consumer websites and logged directly into the secure monitoring portals I used for my corporate investigations. I requested a merged report from Equifax Experian and TransUnion. The progress bar spun for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had spent my entire career tracking down stolen funds and exposing corporate embezzlers, but nothing prepares you for the visceral shock of seeing your own financial identity compromised. The screen flashed, and the detailed multi-page report loaded. My eyes immediately dropped to the summary section. My breath hitched. There it was, displayed in stark red numbers across all 3 bureaus. My score was obliterated. I scrolled down to the detailed account history, expecting to see a stolen credit card or a fraudulent auto loan. Those were common identity theft tactics. But what I saw listed under the open accounts section made my blood run entirely cold. This was not a stolen credit card used to buy electronics. This was a massive, life-altering liability. And as I stared at the origination date and the listed mailing address attached to the fraudulent account, the pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. The desperate phone calls, the sudden demand for cash, the fake Christmas announcement about gifting the house to Courtney. It was never about a baby shower. It was about covering up a massive federal crime. I clicked the highlighted red text, linking to the largest derogatory mark on my credit report. The page loaded to reveal a primary mortgage account. The loan amount was a staggering $1,500,000. I quickly scanned the listed property address. It was the sprawling colonial home in Connecticut, the house my parents currently occupied, the house my father had just publicly promised to give to my sister. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart hammering a steady, angry rhythm against my ribs. I checked the origination date. It originated exactly 3 years ago. My mind instantly raced back to that specific time. It was the exact same month my parents had sat me down in their living room claiming they were updating their estate planning and life insurance policies. They had asked me to fill out a series of background forms telling me it was a mandatory requirement for naming me as an executor and a beneficiary. Like an obedient daughter, I handed over my social security number, banking details, and copies of my identification. They had not been planning for their passing. They had been planning a massive cash-out refinance using my pristine financial background as a joint borrower to secure a loan they could never qualify for on their own. I moved my mouse to the payment history section. The ledger told a predictable story. For the first 2 years, the monthly payments were made on time. Then 8 months ago, the payments started to become erratic. A week late here, a month late there. Then exactly 4 months ago, all payments had completely stopped. The account status was marked as severely delinquent. But the most terrifying detail was nestled at the very bottom of the page, in a small, sterile font. A notice of default had been issued. The property was scheduled for a public auction. The house was exactly 60 days away from total foreclosure. I needed physical proof. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how to navigate the digital archives of county property records. I opened a new tab, accessed the Connecticut County Clerk's database, and typed in my parents' address. I paid the $20 processing fee and immediately downloaded the official digitized mortgage documents. I scrolled rapidly past the standard legal jargon until I reached the final signature pages. There it was. My name was printed clearly on the line designated for the joint borrower. Below the printed name was a signature. I stared at the ink strokes on the screen. It was a loopy, overly practiced script that completely failed to capture the sharp angles of my actual handwriting. It was an unmistakable forgery, and I recognized the penmanship instantly. It was my mother's handwriting. She had sat at her expensive dining room table, practiced my signature a few times, and then legally bound me to $1.5 million of debt. The document had been notarized by someone named Thomas Jenkins, likely a friend from their country club willing to bend the rules for a quick favor. The sheer scale of the betrayal washed over me, replacing my initial shock with a freezing, calculated clarity. My parents had stolen my identity. The people who raised me had committed felony wire fraud and identity theft. Everything that happened at the Christmas party suddenly made perfect twisted sense. The dramatic announcement about gifting the estate to Courtney and Jamal was never an act of generosity. It was a calculated exit strategy. The house was already sinking and the bank was coming to repossess it. By publicly claiming they were transferring the property, they were trying to create a narrative where they gracefully walked away, leaving me entirely responsible for the defaulted loan attached to my social security number. They thought they had trapped me. They assumed I would simply absorb the financial blow, quietly fix the credit issue to protect my own career and save them from public humiliation. They thought the obedient daughter who paid the catering bills would just pay off a federal mortgage to keep the family name out of the local gossip columns. I saved the forged documents to my hard drive, creating a file named Federal Evidence. The initial panic I felt about my office lease completely evaporated. I was no longer worried about a denied application. I was staring at a conspiracy orchestrated by my own blood. But a massive question still remained. Where did the money go? You do not just pull $1.5 million in cash out of a house and lose it on groceries and country club dues. I opened a spreadsheet. It was time to follow the money and see exactly what my family had been buying with my stolen future. I cracked my knuckles and opened my professional investigation software. Tracing large sums of hidden money was exactly what corporate clients paid me $500 an hour to do. My parents were amateur criminals, at best, leaving a digital trail so wide and careless it was almost insulting to my intelligence. First, I pulled the disbursement records from the county property registry. When a bank funds a massive mortgage refinance, they wire the money to an escrow account, which then distributes the cash. I located the specific wire transfer for $1,500,000. From the local title company, the funds had been routed directly to a joint checking account bearing my father's name and my forged signature. The money did not stay in that joint account for very long. Using public records and the subpoenaed banking metadata I could legally access through my firm's financial intelligence databases, I tracked the routing numbers. The entire sum was transferred out exactly 48 hours after the loan closed. It was wired into a corporate business checking account under the name Apex Vanguard Holdings Limited Liability Company. A quick search of the state business registry gave me the exact answer I was looking for. The sole managing member and registered agent for Apex Vanguard Holdings was Jamal. The missing pieces of the puzzle fell into place with sickening clarity. 3 years ago, Jamal had relentlessly pitched a grand vision of becoming a commercial real estate mogul to anyone who would listen. He claimed he had exclusive access to dilapidated strip malls that he was going to magically flip into high-end retail spaces. He just needed the initial capital to get started. My father, desperate to prove his son-in-law was a financial genius and blinded by the promise of massive returns, had eagerly agreed to fund it. But my parents were essentially broke, living entirely on maxed-out credit cards and the remaining equity of their home. To extract that much cash for Jamal, they needed a borrower with a pristine credit history to co-sign a massive loan, so they simply stole my identity. I spent the next hour mapping out Jamal's brilliant real estate investments. He had taken my stolen $1.5 million and purchased 2 commercial properties at the absolute peak of the market. But Jamal was a flashy social media broker, not an actual property developer. He had absolutely no idea how to manage construction contractors, secure commercial zoning permits, or attract paying retail tenants. He spent his days posting videos of himself driving his leased Porsche, pretending to be a self-made millionaire, while the properties sat completely empty. The exorbitant property taxes and monthly maintenance costs quickly bled his company dry. I pulled the public records for both of his commercial addresses. Both properties had been foreclosed upon and repossessed by the banks exactly 8 months ago. That timeline matched perfectly with the defaulted payments on the residential mortgage. The exact moment Jamal's fake business collapsed the money to pay the monthly note on my parents' house completely vanished. The entire family had been sitting on this ticking financial time bomb for 8 months. They were watching the foreclosure clock count down, knowing perfectly well that my social security number was the primary one tied to the impending explosion. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, letting the sheer magnitude of their deception wash over me. The Christmas party, the grand emotional toast. My father standing up in front of 40 wealthy neighbors to announce he was generously gifting the family estate to Courtney and Jamal for their new baby. It was all a meticulously crafted smokescreen. My parents knew the bank was going to physically lock them out of the house in 60 days. By publicly announcing they were giving the house to Courtney, they were establishing a fake narrative for their elite social circle. When the county sheriffs and the eviction notices eventually arrived, they could simply spin the story. They would tell the country club members that they had gracefully moved out to downsize, but their vicious, jealous daughter Allison had somehow ruined the property paperwork. Or they would claim the foreclosure was entirely my fault, because I cruelly refused to pay the mortgage I supposedly co-signed. They would maintain their perfect upper-middle-class facade. Jamal and Courtney would play the tragic victims who lost their beautiful nursery, and my life would be utterly destroyed. They had planned to dump a toxic foreclosed asset directly onto my ruined credit while walking away with clean hands and the sympathy of the neighborhood. They were willing to sacrifice my career, my financial independence, and my future just to save their own fragile egos. I closed the county registry tabs and opened a blank text document. The sadness I had felt driving away from the party on Christmas Eve was completely gone. In its place was a cold, hyper-focused rage. They thought they were dealing with a compliant, naive daughter. They forgot they were dealing with a forensic accountant. It took exactly 3 days for the silence to break. I spent that time methodically compiling every piece of digital evidence into a secure encrypted folder on my secure server. I tracked every penny of the stolen $1.5 million building a financial timeline so bulletproof that even a first-year law student could win the case. I was printing out the final routing numbers when my cell phone vibrated across my glass desk. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Allison, my sweet girl," my father answered. His voice was thick with manufactured warmth. It was his signature negotiating tone, the one he used when he was trying to charm a stubborn client into signing a bad contract. "I am so glad you answered. Your mother and I have been talking non-stop, and we just feel awful about how things escalated over the holidays. Christmas is a highly emotional time, and mistakes were made on all sides. We want to put this ugly chapter behind us. Mistakes on all sides. The classic tactic of a master manipulator spreading the blame to avoid taking any real accountability." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring directly at the forged mortgage document displayed on my computer monitor. "Is that right?" I asked simply. "Absolutely," he continued smoothly, entirely missing the ice in my voice. "Family is the most important thing in the world. We cannot let a silly misunderstanding over catering and a few harsh words tear us apart. Courtney is stressed, Jamal is worried about the baby, and your mother has barely slept. We need to heal. I booked a private room for lunch tomorrow at the Capitol Grill downtown. Just the family. We want to properly apologize and make amends. Let us break bread and fix this." The Capitol Grill, an expensive high-end steakhouse where the lighting was always dim and the waiters were trained to be completely discreet. It was the absolute perfect setting to corner someone. If they just wanted to apologize, they would have invited me to their house. But their house was currently property of the bank, and they desperately needed neutral ground to trap me. They were going to slide a piece of paper across that white linen tablecloth. They were going to try to legally bind me to the fraudulent debt before the eviction notices arrived. That sounds wonderful, Dad. I lied, injecting just enough hesitation into my voice to make him believe I was still the eager-to-please daughter desperate for his validation. I think a family lunch is exactly what we need right now. Excellent, he boomed, clearly relieved that his trap had been set so easily. We will see you tomorrow at noon sharp. Dress nicely, sweetheart. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk. A cold smile crept across my face. They really thought I was that stupid. They thought a medium-rare steak and a fake apology would magically erase felony wire fraud. But I was not going to a family reconciliation. I was walking into a crime scene, and I needed to gather a legally binding confession. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a small rectangular matte black device. It was a high-definition digital audio recorder standard issue for forensic field investigators when interviewing hostile financial subjects. I charged the battery to maximum capacity and ran a quick audio diagnostic. I clipped it to the inside of my blazer lapel, testing the microphone sensitivity by whispering a few phrases from across the room. The playback was crystal clear, capturing every syllable with perfect precision. It would easily pick up multiple voices in a quiet dining room. The next morning, I dressed with absolute intention. I chose a sharp, tailored navy suit that made me look like the corporate auditor I was, rather than the submissive daughter they expected. I arrived at the restaurant exactly 10 minutes early. The maitre d' escorted me to a secluded private dining room in the back, shielded from the main dining floor by heavy velvet curtains. The table was already set with sparkling crystal water glasses and heavy silver cutlery. I took a seat facing the entrance, positioning myself in the power position of the room. I reached inside my jacket and pressed the tactile record button on the concealed device. A tiny vibration confirmed it was actively capturing audio. I smoothed my napkin over my lap and took a slow sip of ice water. My heart rate was incredibly steady. I was no longer the scapegoat of this family. I was the executioner of their financial facade, and they were about to hand me the final nail for their own coffins. The heavy mahogany door creaked open and my parents walked in, followed closely by Courtney and Jamal. The performance was about to begin. They took their seats around the heavy oak table. My mother, Patricia, immediately reached out to squeeze my hand, her face arranged in a mask of maternal concern. Allison's sweetheart, she cooed, her diamond rings cold against my skin. We are just so thrilled you agreed to meet us. The holidays were a complete disaster, and we simply hate being at odds with you. I gently but firmly pulled my hand away, resting it on my lap near the hidden microphone. It is good to see you all, I said, maintaining a neutral, pleasant expression. Jamal and Courtney sat across from me. Jamal looked unusually tense, his eyes darting toward the thick leather menu, while Courtney rubbed her slightly rounded stomach, playing the role of the stressed, expectant mother to perfection. A waiter appeared, taking our drink orders and offering the lunch specials. My father ordered an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, without looking at the price, a habit he clearly intended to maintain even while staring down the barrel of foreclosure. Once the waiter poured the wine and retreated behind the heavy velvet curtains, the atmosphere in the private room noticeably shifted. The forced smiles faded into expressions of serious, calculated business. My father cleared his throat, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the crisp, white tablecloth. "Allison," he began, adopting his best paternal, authoritative tone. "We have all done a lot of soul-searching over the past few days. We recognize that relying on your personal credit card was unfair. You are a successful woman, and you deserve your financial independence. We want to completely separate our finances moving forward, so this kind of ugly conflict never happens again. I took a slow sip of my ice water. That sounds like a very mature decision, Dad. How exactly do you plan to execute this separation? Jamal quickly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal paper. He smoothed it out on the table and slid it carefully across the linen until it rested right in front of my plate. This is a family trust agreement, Jamal explained, his voice slick and persuasive. My broker friends use these all the time to protect generational wealth. We want to place the Connecticut house and all associated financial liabilities into a formal trust. This document simply reorganizes the estate so that Courtney and I take over the daily management of the property for the baby while legally protecting you from any future tax burdens. It is a win for everyone. My mother nodded enthusiastically. It is just a formality, darling. We had our country club lawyer draft it up yesterday. If you just sign the last page, we can take it to the notary this afternoon and you will be completely free of our financial drama forever. We can go back to just being a happy family. I looked down at the document. The top page was indeed titled Family Trust Agreement in bold, authoritative letters. To an untrained eye, it looked like standard estate planning paperwork. But I was not an untrained eye. I spent 60 hours a week dissecting complex financial fraud. I picked up the stack of papers and deliberately flipped past the distracting summary pages, heading straight for the dense legal clauses buried in the middle. My eyes scanned the meticulously crafted paragraphs. There it was. Buried under Section 4, Subsection B was a clause completely unrelated to any family trust. It was a formal ratification of debt. The clause explicitly stated that the undersigned, which would be me, fully acknowledged, authorized, and accepted sole responsibility for the $1,500,000 mortgage originated 3 years prior. Furthermore, it contained an indemnity clause effectively waiving my right to pursue any civil or criminal litigation against the co-signers regarding the origination of said loan. It was not a trust agreement. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. If I signed this piece of paper, the forgery would be legally erased. I would be formally admitting that I willingly took out the loan and gave them the money. They would be entirely absolved of federal wire fraud and identity theft, and the bank would have full legal authorization to come after my personal assets when the house finally foreclosed. I kept my eyes glued to the paper, letting the silence stretch in the room. I could hear Jamal shifting nervously in his leather chair. My father took a large gulp of his red wine. They were watching me like vultures waiting for a wounded animal to finally stop breathing. I needed them to admit out loud what they had done. I needed the recording to be absolutely flawless. I took a deep breath and looked up. I looked up from the thick stack of papers and met my father's expectant gaze. I kept my facial expression completely blank, channeling the genuine confusion of someone who had just stumbled upon a minor administrative error. "Dad," I said slowly, tapping my index finger against the 4th page of the document. "I am reading through this section about the property liabilities. Why is my social security number listed on a primary mortgage origination from 3 years ago? I never signed any mortgage paperwork for the Connecticut house." My mother immediately let out a dramatic sigh, fluttering her hand in the air, as if I were being entirely unreasonable. "Oh, Allison, please do not start analyzing every single sentence like you are at the office. It is just standard legal boilerplate. The lawyer said we had to include it to make the trust valid." I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on my father. "It is not boilerplate, Mom. This clause explicitly states that I am the co-signer on a $1,500,000 loan." "Dad, I did not sign this. Who forged my signature?" The private dining room went dead silent. The faint clinking of silverware from the main restaurant filtered through the heavy velvet curtains. My father did not look ashamed or panicked. Instead, his face flushed with the familiar, arrogant annoyance he always displayed when I dared to question his authority. He set his wineglass down with a sharp clack against the table. We raised you, Allison. My father scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. We needed the equity for Jamal's business. It is just paperwork, Allison. Sign it and stop being dramatic. Your mother and I gave you a premium education and the exact foundation to build your entire successful corporate career. You were perfectly positioned to finally help the family out. We simply signed your name because we knew you would overthink it and ruin a golden opportunity. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained perfectly still on my lap. The concealed microphone on my blazer lapel was capturing every single word of his stunning admission. I needed Jamal to incriminate himself next. I turned my head slightly, focusing my attention directly on my brother-in-law. "So you knew about this, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "You deliberately took $1.5 million of federal loan money secured under my stolen identity to fund your failing property flips." Jamal leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, completely unbothered by the accusation of federal wire fraud. He actually smiled a slick, condescending grin that made my stomach turn. "Listen to yourself, Allison," he argued smoothly. "You are being completely dramatic over nothing. The business investments did not pan out exactly as planned, but that is just how the real estate market works. There are natural ups and downs. The bank is simply getting aggressive about the missed payments right now, which is precisely why we need you to sign this trust agreement today. You make great money, you can handle the monthly payments. You have zero massive debts. You can keep the property afloat until the local commercial market fully rebounds. You want me to individually pay off a fraudulent mortgage so you can avoid foreclosure," I summarized flatly. Courtney suddenly slammed her hand flat against the table, tears welling up in her eyes on command. "You are so incredibly selfish," she cried, pointing an accusing finger at me. "Jamal is working so hard to provide for our innocent baby. Mom and Dad are losing precious sleep every single night over this stupid bank loan. All you have to do is sign the paper, take over the payments, and we can keep the family home. You have plenty of money. Why do you insist on constantly punishing us?" The sheer delusion inside the room was suffocating. They had completely convinced themselves that I was the villain for hesitating to absorb their massive criminal debt. My mother reached across the table again, pushing a silver pen directly toward my hand. "Just sign it, sweetheart," she urged softly. "We can order dessert and celebrate. The awful nightmare will be entirely over." I looked at the pen, then at the fraudulent document, and finally at the four faces staring back at me. The trap they had meticulously built was fully deployed, but they had absolutely no idea they were the ones permanently standing inside it. My father had explicitly confessed to forging my signature and committing identity theft. Jamal had explicitly confessed to utilizing the fraudulently obtained funds and expecting me to cover the resulting financial fallout. The digital recorder had silently captured every single illegal admission with pristine audio clarity. I had everything. I had everything. I did not reach for the silver pen my mother was pushing across the white linen tablecloth. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not shed a single tear of betrayal. The overwhelming anger that had consumed me over the past few days completely evaporated, replaced by a freezing and absolute calm. This was the exact moment they expected me to break. They had spent my entire life conditioning me to fold under their collective pressure to sacrifice my own well-being to maintain their perfect suburban illusion. My father impatiently tapped his expensive watch. "Come on, Allison," he urged, his tone shifting from paternal to deeply irritated. "We do not have all day. The notary is waiting at the golf club, and I have a tea time at 3 o'clock. Let us get this over with so we can all move on." Jamal leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, with a victorious smirk. "Do the right thing for once," he added smoothly. "Protect your family." I looked at Jamal, studying his arrogant posture. Then I looked at my sister Courtney, who was already browsing a designer maternity catalog on her phone, now that she assumed the financial crisis was averted. Finally, I locked eyes with my parents. They were not my family. They were financial parasites who had actively tried to destroy my future to fund their own delusions of grandeur. I slowly pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, breaking the tense silence of the private dining room. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy suit jacket. "What are you doing?" my mother asked, her hand freezing in midair. "Sit down and sign the paperwork, Allison." I reached into my designer handbag. My father immediately sat up straighter, assuming I was reaching for my own trusted fountain pen. Instead, I pulled out my leather wallet. I retrieved a crisp $100 bill and tossed it casually onto the center of the table. It fluttered down, landing perfectly on top of the fraudulent family trust agreement. "What is this?" Jamal demanded, his smirk instantly vanishing. "That is for my ice water and the complimentary bread," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and cold. "I am not signing your confession, and I am certainly not paying off the $1.5 million federal mortgage you fraudulently obtained using my stolen Social Security number." My father's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. "You listen to me right now," he hissed, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper to avoid alerting the restaurant staff outside the velvet curtains. "If you walk out that door, you are completely dead to us. We will disown you. You will have absolutely no family left." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. "You cannot disown someone you already sold." "Dad," I replied simply. Courtney dropped her phone, her mouth falling open in genuine shock. "You cannot just leave us with this debt!" she shrieked, her fake maternal fragility completely gone. "We will lose the house. The baby will not have a nursery. Then you better start packing boxes." "Courtney," I told her, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Because the bank is foreclosing in 60 days and I am not rescuing you." I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the room erupted into total chaos. Jamal shouted curses. My mother started hyperventilating, and my father yelled my name with an aggressive fury I had never heard before. I paused right at the edge of the heavy velvet curtains and looked back over my shoulder. They were all standing now, panicked and furious, staring at the unsigned document and the single $100 bill. "You told everyone at the Christmas party that I was just a guest," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly over their shouting. "You should have let me just be a guest. Guests know exactly when it is time to leave." I pushed through the curtains and walked briskly through the main dining room. The ambient chatter and soft jazz music of the restaurant washed over me. I did not look back. I pushed open the heavy glass front doors and stepped out into the crisp, freezing winter air. My heart was pounding, but my lungs felt completely clear for the first time in 33 years. I reached a hand inside my blazer lapel and pressed the stop button on the digital recorder. The file was securely saved. My family had just handed me a loaded gun, and now it was time to pull the trigger. I walked down the busy city sidewalk, pulled out my cell phone, and hailed a private car service. I was not going back to my office. I had a very important appointment to make. The black town car pulled up to the curb just as I ended the ride request on my phone. I slid into the quiet leather interior and gave the driver the address for the federal building downtown. I was not just a victim reporting a stolen identity. I was a licensed professional delivering a fully constructed federal case on a silver platter. When the car stopped, I paid the driver, grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, and walked through the rotating doors. Security was tight, but I navigated the metal detectors. I approached the front desk and requested to speak with the duty agent. The receptionist directed me to a waiting area on the 4th floor. 10 minutes later, a tall man walked out to greet me. He politely introduced himself as Special Agent Miller. I shook his hand firmly. "I am a forensic accountant, Agent Miller," I told him, "and I am here to report a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and identity theft conspiracy involving a fake commercial real estate enterprise." He raised an eyebrow and gestured for me to follow him into an interrogation room. The room was sparse, featuring only a metal table and 3 chairs. Agent Miller sat down and opened a blank notepad. I did not waste his time with emotional family drama. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a 4-inch thick binder, sliding it precisely to the center of the table. I had spent the last 3 days meticulously organizing every single piece of evidence. Tab 1, I explained, pointing to the index, contains the original mortgage origination documents from 3 years ago. You will see my printed name as a co-signer, but the signature is a verified forgery. Tab 2 contains the county property records and the escrow disbursement wire transfers. The bank funded $1,500,000, which was routed directly into a joint checking account controlled by my father, Richard. Agent Miller leaned forward, his professional skepticism quickly giving way to genuine interest. He began flipping through the heavily annotated pages, his eyes scanning the highlighted routing numbers I had perfectly mapped out. And where did the money go from there? He asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. Tab 3, I replied smoothly. Exactly 48 hours after the loan closed, the entire sum was transferred to a limited liability company. That company is solely owned by my brother-in-law Jamal. He used the fraudulently obtained federal funds to purchase 2 commercial properties that have since been repossessed. The money is completely gone, the residential mortgage is currently in default, and the bank has officially issued a notice of foreclosure. Agent Miller slowly closed the binder, visibly impressed by the sheer volume of financial intelligence sitting in front of him. "This is an incredibly thorough paper trail, Allison," he noted gravely. "But proving they intentionally forged your signature without your consent is usually the hardest part. They will likely claim you gave them verbal permission to use your social security number." I smiled a cold, practiced smile. I anticipated that exact defense, I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed the black digital audio recorder right next to the binder. "Less than an hour ago, I met with the CO signers at a private restaurant. They attempted to coerce me into signing a fraudulent family trust agreement to ratify the debt." I pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio of my father's voice filled the small room. "We needed the equity for Jamal's business. It is just paperwork, Allison. Sign it and stop being dramatic." Agent Miller listened intently as the recording captured Jamal openly acknowledging the stolen funds and demanding I pay the monthly mortgage. When the audio clip ended, the room was perfectly quiet. Agent Miller let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "You just handed us a textbook confession," he said, picking up the recorder to log it as official evidence. "I am forwarding this immediately to the United States Attorney's Office. Because of the sheer amount of stolen money involved, this is a major federal offense. Furthermore, I am contacting the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division right now." If Jamal was funneling stolen loan money through a defunct corporate entity, he is almost certainly guilty of massive tax evasion. The gears of the federal justice system were officially in motion. I stood up, shook Agent Miller's hand once more, and left the federal building. The winter air felt completely different now. It felt like absolute freedom. I had done my part. The authorities had everything they needed to dismantle my parents' perfectly curated life. Now I needed to ensure the bank accelerated their timeline. I immediately pulled out my cell phone and directly dialed the toll-free number for the primary mortgage lender's fraud department. The automated voice on the other end of the line droned on, listing numerical options in a monotonous loop. I stood on the corner of the busy downtown intersection, watching the city move rapidly around me while the phone rang. The freezing wind whipped through the tall concrete corridors, but I felt entirely impervious to the cold. Finally, the automated system clicked over and a human voice answered. "Good morning, National Trust Mortgage Fraud Division. This is Senior Investigator Harrison speaking. How can I help you today?" I firmly gripped the phone, ready to deliver the final devastating blow. "My name is Allison," I replied firmly, maintaining my professional corporate tone. "I am calling to immediately report a fraudulent mortgage origination currently attached to my personal credit file. The massive loan number is tied directly to my social security number, but I never signed the closing documents. I just walked out of the federal field office and have an active criminal case number, along with a formal identity theft police report." Agent Harrison immediately dropped his standard customer service tone, replacing it with sharp professional urgency. Please quickly provide your full social security number and the exact property address. I recited the numbers clearly followed by the Connecticut address of my parents' sprawling colonial house. I heard the rapid, heavy clacking of a mechanical keyboard through the receiver. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with tension. I see the account, Allison. See the account. This is a $1,500,000 residential loan currently in severe default. You are listed as the primary co-signer alongside a Richard. Richard is my father, I explained smoothly, walking slowly down the pavement. 3 years ago, he and my mother used my personal information to secure this massive fraudulent bank loan. They did this without my knowledge or consent. They forged my signature on the closing documents to completely bypass your income verification protocols. The notary involved was likely compromised by them. I have already submitted a full forensic accounting portfolio to the federal authorities, and the Criminal Investigation Division is actively involved. I can email you the case numbers, the police report, and a high-resolution digital copy of the forged signature analysis right now. Please do so immediately, Agent Harrison said, providing me with a secure direct email address. I quickly opened my encrypted personal cloud drive application. I attached the necessary files and hit send. I stayed on the line as he received the documents. The silence stretched for 3 long minutes while he reviewed the case numbers and compared my actual digital signature from my submitted driver license to the loopy, inaccurate forgery on the mortgage contract. This is highly irregular, he finally murmured, sounding genuinely shocked. The forgery is glaringly obvious when you compare the two directly. With these federal case numbers and the official police report, I have the authority to act immediately on behalf of the bank to protect our compromised financial assets. We take identity theft involving massive federal loans extremely seriously. What exactly happens next then, I asked, leaning against a cold brick building. First, I am completely severing your social security number from this account, Agent Harrison stated with absolute certainty. You will receive a formal clearance letter via email within the hour. I am contacting the credit bureaus directly on our priority line. Your credit score will be restored to its original standing by tomorrow morning. You are entirely cleared of this $1,500,000 liability. A massive invisible weight completely lifted off my tired shoulders. The suffocating dread I had felt completely evaporated. Thank you, I said. But what happens to the property and the primary borrower now? Agent Harrison let out a sharp breath. Standard foreclosure proceedings require a 60-day grace period before an eviction can be legally enforced. However, because this loan was obtained through verified wire fraud and identity theft, the standard grace period is completely voided. This is no longer a simple delinquent account. It is an active crime scene involving stolen bank funds. I am accelerating the foreclosure process immediately. We are issuing an immediate official notice of default. What does that mean for the current occupants, I asked, wanting to hear the absolute confirmation. It means the bank is taking full legal ownership of the property today, he explained coldly. We will be dispatching local law enforcement to serve the eviction notice. They will have practically zero time to vacate the premises. Richard is now solely responsible for the fraudulent debt, and our legal department will be cooperating fully with the federal prosecutors. You did the right thing by calling us immediately, Allison. I thanked him for his incredibly swift action and ended the long, secure phone call. After ending the secure call with Agent Harrison, I walked 3 blocks down the street to the county courthouse. Using the audio recording from the restaurant specifically, the parts where my father and Jamal made direct threats regarding my safety, I filed for an emergency ex parte restraining order. Given the active federal investigation numbers I provided, the judge signed the temporary order without hesitation. Jamal and my father were now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my workplace. I paid the fee, tucked the documents into my briefcase, and finally went home. It was the best sleep I had experienced in years. The federal government moves slowly on most days, but the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service strikes like lightning when massive wire fraud is involved. By 9 the following morning, I was sitting at my desk reviewing an audit. I knew exactly what was happening across town. The IRS would have initiated a sweeping asset freeze on any bank accounts linked to Jamal or his fraudulent shell company. They locked down funds first to prevent criminals from moving stolen money offshore. At 10:15, my office phone rang. It was the front desk receptionist sounding alarmed. "Allison, there is a man in the lobby demanding to see you," she said, her voice shaking. "He bypassed the security turnstiles and is refusing to leave." I calmly locked my computer screen and dialed building security. "We have a hostile trespasser on the 30th floor," I told the head guard. "He is currently violating a court-ordered restraining order. Please dispatch local law enforcement immediately." I walked out of my office toward the main reception area. Jamal was standing in the center of the pristine marble lobby, looking completely unhinged. His expensive tailored suit was wrinkled, and sweat beaded heavily on his forehead. The polished, arrogant real estate broker I had seen at the restaurant was gone. In his place stood a desperate, cornered man watching his fake empire crumble. Allison Jamal screamed the second he saw me. My colleagues poked their heads out of their offices. "You vindictive monster! You called the federal government on me. My business accounts are completely frozen. My personal checking accounts are locked. I went to buy coffee this morning and my debit card was declined. The bank teller told me the IRS flagged my entire portfolio for criminal tax evasion." I stood silently behind the curved wooden reception desk. Jamal took a heavy step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Fix this right now," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You are destroying my life. Courtney is at home sobbing because we cannot even access our grocery money. How can you take food out of the mouth of your unborn nephew?" His attempt to weaponize the baby again fell entirely flat. I did not flinch at his aggressive posturing. I looked at the receptionist, then back at Jamal. "I did not freeze your accounts, Jamal," I replied, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet lobby. "The consequences of committing felony wire fraud froze your accounts. And as for my nephew, he deserves parents who do not steal millions of dollars to fund their own delusions." Before Jamal could shout another string of insults, the ding of the lobby elevator echoed through the room. The steel doors slid open, revealing 3 uniformed city police officers, accompanied by 2 building security guards. The officers stepped out quickly, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Ma'am, did you call about a trespasser?" the lead officer asked. "Yes, officer," I answered smoothly. "That man is Jamal. He is currently violating an active emergency restraining order I filed yesterday afternoon." I stepped around the desk and handed the officer my certified copy of the court document. Jamal turned pale. "Restraining order," he stammered, taking a step back as the officers quickly surrounded him. "We are just having a family dispute. I am not a criminal." The lead officer reviewed the signed document before nodding to his partner. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, stepping into Jamal's personal space. "You cannot arrest me." Jamal yelled, his panic elevating as the officer forcefully grabbed his wrist. "I have high-profile clients. I am a respected business owner. Allison, tell them to stop." The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut was the only answer he received. The police officer recited his Miranda rights as they marched him toward the waiting elevator. Jamal craned his neck, locking eyes with me one last time, his expression a mix of absolute terror and disbelief. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his frantic screaming. The lobby fell completely silent. I thanked the receptionist, turned around, and went right back to work. The elevator doors had barely closed before the office rumor mill started churning. I walked calmly back to my desk, ignoring the wide eyes and whispered conversations of my colleagues. In the world of corporate finance, witnessing a federal arrest in the lobby was front-page news. But I did not have the luxury of entertaining their curiosity. I sat down, smoothed my skirt, and opened the spreadsheet I had been reviewing before Jamal rudely interrupted my morning. I knew the shockwaves of his arrest were currently tearing through my family, and it was only a matter of time before the next desperate attempt to extort me began. I did not wait long. Exactly 3 hours later, my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of my desk. The caller identification flashed with my sister's name. I let it vibrate a few times, taking a slow sip of my coffee before picking up the device. I pressed the green accept button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not even get the chance to say hello. A piercing, hysterical sob erupted through the speakers so loud I had to pull the phone a few inches away from my face. "Allison, you have to help us!" Courtney screamed, her voice distorted by panic and tears. "They took him. They actually took him away in handcuffs. I am sitting here in the precinct waiting room, and they will not even let me see him. He is in a federal holding cell." I kept my voice perfectly level. "I know where he is, Courtney. I am the one who had him arrested for violating my restraining order. And the federal agents waiting for him at the station are there because of the wire fraud." "You are a monster!" she shrieked, the sound echoing sharply in my quiet office. "How could you do this to your own family?" The judge set his bail at $500,000, but the bail bondsman says we need $50,000 in cash right now to get him out. I tried to use our joint checking account, but the bank teller told me the Internal Revenue Service has completely frozen every single asset we own. I cannot even buy a bottle of water right now. "That is standard procedure when the government is investigating a massive financial crime," I explained smoothly, completely devoid of any sympathy. "When you steal $1.5 million from a federally insured bank, they tend to lock down your access to the financial system." "I do not care about the stupid bank," Courtney wailed, slamming her hand against something hard on her end of the line. "I care about my husband sitting in a jail cell. You are the only person we know who has $50,000 in liquid cash sitting around. You need to wire the money to the bondsman right now. Jamal has to come home. He cannot stay in that horrible place." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the large window at the city skyline. "You want me to pay $50,000 to bail out the man who stole my identity, ruined my credit, and showed up at my workplace to intimidate me?" The sheer entitlement was almost clinically fascinating to me. "He is family! Allison!" she demanded, her tone shifting from desperate pleading to vicious entitlement. "You have more money than you know what to do with. You are just punishing us because you are jealous that I am married and starting a family while you are completely alone." Then she deployed the ultimate weapon. The same manipulative tactic my mother had taught her to use since we were children. She took a deep, ragged breath, forcing her voice into a dramatic, trembling whisper. "My doctor told me any severe stress could trigger a miscarriage, Allison. I am having terrible cramps right now because of what you did to my husband. If I lose this baby today, it is entirely your fault. You will have the blood of your own nephew on your hands for the rest of your miserable life." The silence stretched for 5 long seconds. She waited for the guilt to break me. She expected me to crumble, apologize, and ask for the wiring instructions. Instead, I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "If you are having medical issues, Courtney, you should probably call an ambulance instead of begging your sister for bail money. Jamal dug his own grave. Now he gets to sit in it. Do not ever call this number again." I pulled the phone away from my ear, cutting off her shrill scream of rage. I pressed the red button to end the call, opened her contact profile, and permanently blocked her number. After permanently blocking Courtney's number, I returned my focus to my corporate audit, intentionally shutting out the toxic noise of my collapsing family. While Jamal was sitting in a federal holding cell and Courtney was panicking in the precinct waiting room, my mother was blissfully unaware of the catastrophic implosion of her fake empire. Patricia was exactly where she always was on a Tuesday afternoon. She was at the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club, enjoying a lavish champagne luncheon with her elite circle of wealthy friends. She had just finished treating 3 of the Homeowner Association board members to expensive spa treatments. When the waiter presented the massive bill, my mother casually handed over her platinum debit card, the one tied to the joint account she shared with my father. She expected the transaction to glide through. Instead, the waiter returned a few minutes later looking deeply uncomfortable. He politely informed her that the card was declined. Assuming it was a bank error, she handed him a backup credit card. Declined. She tried a third. Declined. The IRS asset freeze was absolute and completely unforgiving. Humiliated in front of her high society friends, Patricia was forced to make an excuse and leave the bill unpaid. She immediately called my father, who was ignoring his phone as the federal reality crashed down upon him. Unable to reach him, she drove directly to her local bank branch, only to be informed by a terrified branch manager that every single account under her name had been frozen by federal order. The realization finally hit her. The credit cards were dead, the cash was gone, the facade was officially over, and she knew exactly who had pulled the plug. I had recently moved into a luxury ground-floor townhouse in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. It featured a small, beautifully landscaped front courtyard decorated with heavy bronze garden statues and manicured hedges. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the tranquility of my street was violently shattered. I was sitting at my home office desk when I heard the screech of tires outside. I looked out the window and saw my mother's Mercedes SUV parked diagonally across my driveway. Patricia stepped out of the vehicle and I barely recognized her. The poised, perfectly manicured society woman was completely gone. Her designer silk blouse was wrinkled, and her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She stormed through my wrought iron front gate and stomped right into my courtyard. "Allison!" She screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing down the pristine street. "Get out here right now!" I did not open the door. I simply stood behind the reinforced glass of my living room window, watching her unravel. When I did not immediately answer, she snapped. She bent down and grabbed a heavy bronze lawn ornament shaped like a resting fawn. With a shocking amount of manic strength, she hurled the metal statue directly at my solid oak front door. The heavy thud resonated through the entire house. She grabbed a heavy ceramic planter, next smashing it against the brick siding, sending soil and shattered pottery flying everywhere. "You are a monster!" Patricia shrieked, entirely abandoning her precious social etiquette. "You ruined your sister. You froze our money. We gave you life, and this is how you repay us. You ungrateful little girl. Open this door before I break it down." She picked up another garden ornament, a heavy stone sundial, and threw it wildly toward my window. Across the street, my wealthy neighbors were stepping out onto their porches, pulling out their smartphones to record the spectacle. Patricia did not care. She was completely blinded by her loss of control. I picked up my phone and dialed the local police precinct. I calmly reported a violent individual destroying property at my address. Within 4 minutes, the wail of police sirens pierced the air. 2 squad cars swerved onto the street, their red and blue lights flashing brightly. Patricia froze, dropping a decorative garden lantern as 3 police officers exited their vehicles and ordered her to step away from the house. She immediately tried to pivot back to her fake country club persona. "Officers, there is a misunderstanding," she gasped. "I am her mother." The officers were not impressed by her designer clothes. They saw the smashed pottery, the dented oak door, and the scattered lawn ornaments. "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back," the commanding officer ordered. Patricia began to sob hysterically, begging them not to arrest her, pleading that she was a respected member of the community. Right in front of a dozen recording neighbors, my mother was forcefully handcuffed, read her rights, and shoved into the waiting police cruiser. Her perfect upper-class facade was permanently shattered. While my mother was sitting in a police cruiser being transported for booking, my father was entirely oblivious to the collapse of his life. Richard was exactly where he spent every Tuesday afternoon. He was on the 18th hole of the Oak Ridge Country Club Championship golf course, surrounded by 3 of his wealthiest friends. He was likely boasting about his fictional real estate empire or bragging about the massive house he was gifting his daughter. He lived entirely in his meticulously constructed fantasy world. But the federal government does not care about your golf handicap at all. At exactly 4 o'clock, the tranquility of the perfectly manicured putting green was interrupted. Two men wearing dark conservative suits and carrying matching leather briefcases bypassed clubhouse security and walked directly onto the grass. They did not wait for my father to finish his putt. They walked right up to his golf cart. Richard, the taller agent, asked, his voice carrying clearly over the afternoon breeze. My father looked up, highly annoyed by the interruption. "Yes, I am Richard," he snapped, leaning on his putter. "Who are you, and how did you get past the front gate? This is a private club." The agent pulled out a gold badge, flashing it so everyone could see. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are serving you with a formal federal indictment for felony wire fraud conspiracy to commit bank fraud and aggravated identity theft." The agent pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and pressed them directly into my father's chest. "You are required to appear in federal court on Monday morning for your arraignment. Do not attempt to leave the state. Have a good afternoon." The agents turned and walked away, leaving my father standing paralyzed on the green. His wealthy friends, the men he had spent decades trying to impress, stared at him in stunned silence. The heavy legal documents slipped from his trembling hands and scattered across the grass. The words wire fraud and identity theft echoed loudly enough for nearby caddies to hear. In a matter of 60 seconds, his pristine reputation, his most prized possession, was completely obliterated. He was exposed as a common criminal in front of the very society he worshipped. I did not witness this scene in person, but I heard all about it exactly 20 minutes later when my cell phone rang. I was still sitting at my home office desk, watching the tow truck haul my mother's abandoned SUV out of my driveway. The caller identification flashed with my father's number. I did not answer, letting it go straight to voicemail. I waited 5 minutes for the recording to process, poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water, and pressed play. The voicemail was a fascinating psychological study of a narcissist rapidly losing total control. It started with blinding, violent rage. "Allison, you vindictive, ungrateful little witch." His voice boomed through the speaker, breathless and panicked. "I just got served by the FBI at the club. The entire board saw it. You have ruined my life. I am going to destroy you for this. I will sue you for defamation. I will make sure you lose your accounting license and never work in this city again. You are going to pay for what you did to this family." Then there was a heavy pause. I could hear the sound of a car engine starting, followed by a shaky, ragged breath. When he spoke again, the aggressive tyrant was gone, replaced by a pathetic, terrified old man realizing the absolute gravity of his situation. "Please, Allison." His voice cracked, sounding small and desperate. "Please call me back. I do not understand what is happening. Your mother is not answering her phone. Jamal is not answering his phone. My debit card was declined at the clubhouse bar. I have absolutely no money to hire a defense attorney. You cannot let me go to federal prison. I am your father. I am an old man. I will do whatever you want. I will sign the house over to you. Just please call the agents and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you signed the mortgage. I am begging you. Please help your daddy." I sat perfectly still, listening to the recording until the system announced the end of the message. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. He was not sorry for stealing my identity. He was only sorry he got caught in front of his golf buddies. I saved the voicemail to the secure folder I shared with Special Agent Miller. Then, just as I had done with my sister, I blocked his number permanently. The silence in my house was absolutely beautiful. The silence in my house was absolutely beautiful. For the next 48 hours, I completely immersed myself in my work, letting the federal justice system do the heavy lifting. I assumed the impending criminal charges, frozen bank accounts, and public humiliation would force my family to retreat into hiding. I expected them to cancel their extravagant social engagements, call a public defender, and start packing up the house they were about to lose. I severely underestimated their absolute commitment to their delusions. On Thursday evening, I was pouring a glass of Pinot Noir when my phone chimed with a new email. It was a forwarded message from my Aunt Susan. Susan had spent the weekend attacking me on social media, but her tone had completely shifted. The subject line read, "Please tell me this is a joke." I clicked open the email. Attached was a highly stylized, digitally animated invitation for Courtney's luxury baby shower. It was scheduled for this upcoming Saturday afternoon. The location was listed as my parents' Connecticut estate. I read Aunt Susan's attached message. Allison, she wrote, I just heard a rumor at the country club that Richard was arrested on the golf course, and Jamal spent Tuesday night in a federal holding cell. Yet Patricia just texted me asking if I'm still attending the shower and strongly implying that cash gifts are preferred. What on earth is actually going on? Are you going to this party? I stared at the screen, genuinely astounded by their sheer audacity. The IRS had frozen every single legitimate penny they had access to. The bank was actively processing the eviction notice for the house they were hosting the party in. My father was facing decades in federal prison. And yet they were still throwing a lavish, catered event for 50 high society guests. I opened my forensic intelligence portal and ran a quick public records check on Jamal. The system showed he had been released from federal custody late Wednesday night. He did not use a standard reputable bonding agency, likely because they all required collateral he no longer legally possessed. Instead, he had secured his temporary freedom through a high-interest, high-risk bail bondsman operating out of a strip mall in a neighboring county. The terms of that kind of release required a massive non-refundable cash payment upfront, usually borrowed from shady lenders. The pieces clicked together instantly. The baby shower was no longer a celebration of an impending child. It was a desperate, unregulated fundraiser. Patricia and Courtney were actively soliciting cash envelopes and expensive gifts from their wealthy country club friends. They fully intended to pocket the gifted money to pay off Jamal's shady bail bondsman and scrape together a minimum cash retainer for a criminal defense attorney. They were going to stand in the backyard of a foreclosed home, drink expensive mimosas, and smile for the cameras while actively defrauding their closest friends. I took a slow sip of my wine. They were actually going to double down on the massive lie. They were going to look those 50 wealthy guests in the eyes and continue playing the role of the successful, generous suburban family. And if they pulled it off, they would walk away with tens of thousands of dollars in untraceable cash, funding their legal defense, while still blaming me for their financial ruin. I set my wine glass down on the granite counter. I had handed the federal authorities all the paperwork they needed, but a quiet arrest on a golf course was not enough to shatter the toxic narrative my mother had spent decades building. She was still trying to spin the story. She was still trying to use my nephew as a prop to extract money from innocent people. I hit reply to Aunt Susan's email. Yes, Susan, I typed smoothly. The rumors are completely true, and yes, I am absolutely attending the baby shower. I have a very special gift for Courtney and Jamal. I closed the laptop and walked into my home office. I opened my secure safe and pulled out 3 specific items. The first was a backup digital copy of the audio recording from the restaurant. The second was the official IRS asset freeze notification I had subpoenaed for my own records. The third was a pristine copy of the immediate foreclosure default notice from the National Trust Mortgage Fraud Division. I placed all 3 items into a sleek, unmarked gift envelope. My parents had told me I was just a guest. They had forcefully demanded I know my place. Well, they were about to find out exactly how a guest behaves when they are invited to a party built entirely on stolen money. I grabbed my car keys. The reckoning awaited. The quiet drive from the busy city to the affluent Connecticut suburbs took exactly 1 hour. I navigated the familiar winding roads of my childhood neighborhood, passing the towering oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns of the elite homeowners association. As I turned onto my parents' street, the sheer scale of their delusion became immediately apparent. They had audaciously hired a private valet service. Expensive luxury sedans lined the entire residential block. I pulled my car up to the valet stand, handed the young man my keys, and tipped him generously. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald green silk dress, adjusted my designer handbag, and walked toward the sprawling colonial estate they no longer legally owned. The heavy wooden front doors were left wide open, allowing guests to flow freely to the expansive backyard. I bypassed the main house and followed the brick pathway leading directly to the garden gates. The setup was absolutely breathtaking and completely fraudulent. Two massive white canvas tents were erected on the pristine lawn draped in expensive pastel floral garlands. Hired waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated through the crowd of 50 elite guests, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes. A towering 5-tier cake stood next to a massive mountain of wrapped gifts and thick congratulatory envelopes. They were projecting immense generational wealth while secretly drowning in federal indictments. As I approached the wrought iron garden gates, the ambient chatter of the wealthy attendees washed over me. I stood in the shadow of a large weeping willow observing the performance. Courtney was seated in a lavish wicker peacock chair wearing a flowing designer maternity gown. She was smiling brightly for a photographer accepting envelopes from older country club women and placing them quickly into a locked decorative birdcage beside her. My mother Patricia was holding court near the open bar, projecting the image of a perfectly carefree matriarch. But Jamal truly commanded the stage. He stood near the center of the main tent holding a microphone, addressing a captivated audience of local investors and neighbors. I want to personally thank everyone for being here today to celebrate the future of our family, Jamal projected smoothly, his voice echoing across the foreclosed property. As many of you know, the real estate market has been incredibly unpredictable lately. But I am proud to say that my commercial development firm is not just surviving, we are absolutely thriving. We just closed on 2 massive commercial retail spaces, and our portfolio is expanding faster than ever. This beautiful baby boy is going to inherit an absolute empire. I look around this incredible estate, graciously gifted to Courtney and me by Richard and Patricia, and I am reminded that hard work and family loyalty truly pay off. The crowd erupted into warm applause. Jamal smiled, his signature arrogant smile soaking in the validation. He had spent Tuesday night in a federal holding cell, bailed out by a strip mall loan shark, and was currently under investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for massive tax evasion. Yet here he stood, actively soliciting cash gifts from the very people he was defrauding. It was sociopathic. I reached into my handbag, my fingers brushing against the crisp gift envelope containing the federal documents. I pushed the heavy wrought iron garden gates open. The metal hinges let out a sharp, audible creak that cut perfectly through the fading applause. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly onto the manicured lawn. The bright afternoon sun caught the emerald fabric of my dress. The effect of my entrance was instantaneous. The society women standing near the gate stopped talking immediately. Their eyes widened. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Did she actually show up? Is that Allison? The wealthy neighbors who had read my mother's tear-jerking Facebook post stared at me with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely unreadable, and walked straight toward the center of the party. My father Richard was conspicuously absent, likely hiding inside the house frantically calling attorneys who demanded retainers he could no longer afford. My mother noticed the sudden shift in energy. Patricia turned her head, her fake smile freezing completely as she locked eyes with me. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled visibly. Courtney stopped posing for the photographer, her hands instinctively flying to her stomach. But Jamal had the most dramatic reaction. He was still holding the microphone when he saw me approaching the main tent. His confident posture completely collapsed. The color drained entirely from his face. He lowered the microphone, the feedback whining sharply through the speakers. The entire garden fell into a heavy, suffocated silence. I had their undivided attention. The heavy, suffocated silence hung in the warm afternoon air. I continued my steady, deliberate walk across the manicured lawn. The wealthy country club members and homeowners association executives instinctively parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear path directly to the main catering tent. Their eyes darted between me and my mother, sensing the explosive tension that was about to shatter their polite afternoon gathering. Patricia was the first to snap out of her paralyzed state. The survival instincts of a cornered socialite kicked in. She quickly handed her crystal champagne flute to a passing waiter and marched directly toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She arranged her face into a tight, strained smile for the benefit of the watching audience, but her eyes were filled with absolute venom. She intercepted me halfway to the tent, stepping directly into my path and grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip. "Allison," she hissed. Her voice dropped to a frantic, vicious whisper meant only for my ears. "What on earth are you doing here? You have absolutely no right to be here. Turn around and walk back to your car right now before I call the police and have you physically removed." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. Then I looked back up into her panicked eyes. I did not pull away violently or raise my voice. I simply leaned in closer. "You do not want to call the police right now, Mom," I whispered back, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Trust me, they are already on their way. And if you do not let go of my arm this exact second, I will tell these people exactly why your platinum card was declined at the spa on Tuesday." Patricia flinched as if I had struck her across the face. Her hand immediately released my arm. The threat of public social ruin was the only language she truly understood. She stepped back, her perfect facade crumbling into an expression of sheer terror. I walked right past her without a second glance. I approached the small wooden stage set up beneath the main tent. Jamal was still standing there, gripping his microphone so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to try and spin my arrival into a joke, but no words came out. The arrogant real estate mogul had completely vanished, leaving only a terrified fraud staring at the woman who held his actual federal file. There was a secondary microphone resting on a stand near the edge of the stage, intended for the karaoke portion of the afternoon. I stepped onto the platform, the wooden floorboards creaking slightly under my heels. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the cool metal of the spare microphone. I lifted it from the stand and turned to face the audio technician sitting at a small table near the speakers. "Cut the music," I instructed him firmly. The young technician, completely intimidated by the sheer intensity of the moment, immediately scrambled to slide the mixer volume down to 0. The upbeat acoustic jazz track that had been playing softly in the background abruptly cut off. The sudden total silence in the massive tent was absolutely deafening. Every single face in the crowd was turned toward me. I stood at the edge of the stage, holding the microphone in one hand and the sleek gift envelope in the other. I looked out over the sea of pastel dresses, tailored suits, and wide eyes. I saw Aunt Susan standing near the chocolate fountain, her hand covering her mouth in shock. I saw the Homeowners Association president holding a neatly wrapped gift box. And I saw Courtney still sitting in her lavish peacock chair, trembling visibly as she realized the massive lie was about to be dragged into the unforgiving daylight. I brought the microphone to my lips. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice projecting loud and crystal clear across the entire garden, bouncing off the brick facade of the foreclosed house behind us. "My name is Allison. I am Courtney's older sister. I know my arrival is a bit unexpected, especially since my mother recently informed many of you that I had cruelly abandoned my family." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few guests exchanged nervous glances. I stepped forward, holding up the crisp envelope so everyone could see it. "I brought my gifts today." I continued, my tone entirely steady and resolute. "But before you hand over any more envelopes of cash or celebrate this beautiful estate my family claims to own, I think everyone should know exactly what they are actually celebrating here today with us." I did not yell. I did not let a single ounce of anger bleed into my voice. The power of my position came entirely from the absolute unshakable truth. I looked directly at the crowd, meeting the eyes of the people my mother had manipulated just days prior. "Mom. Dad." I projected clearly, my voice ringing through the pristine white tent. "You told everyone here that I abandoned you on Christmas. You went on social media and told our extended family that I was a heartless, ungrateful daughter who refused to help her aging parents and her pregnant sister during a time of need. You painted a beautiful picture of yourselves as the tragic victims of my sudden, inexplicable cruelty." A collective murmur rippled through the seated guests. Aunt Susan shifted uncomfortably, clutching her expensive designer purse. I kept my posture perfectly straight and continued. "But you conveniently forgot to mention exactly why I walked away. You forgot to tell your country club friends that 3 years ago you actively stole my identity. You forged my signature on federal closing documents to illegally take out a $1,500,000 mortgage on this exact house." The crowd let out an audible collective gasp. Several women brought their hands to their mouths in pure shock. I turned my gaze directly toward Jamal, who was frozen on the wooden stage just a few feet away. "And you did it," I said, pointing directly at him, "to secretly fund Jamal's completely disastrous commercial real estate and cryptocurrency scams." That was the absolute breaking point. The sophisticated facade Jamal had desperately tried to maintain completely shattered. He let out a furious guttural shout. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, abandoning any pretense of the wealthy businessman he claimed to be. He lunged across the stage, throwing his entire body weight forward, his hand reaching aggressively to snatch the microphone right out of my grip. I had anticipated his violent, impulsive reaction. As he lunged, I simply pivoted cleanly to my left. Jamal, entirely blinded by his own panic and reckless momentum, missed the microphone entirely. He stumbled awkwardly off the edge of the low wooden stage, crashing hard into a table stacked with expensive floral arrangements and crystal champagne glasses. The table violently collapsed under his weight, sending shattered glass and icy water cascading across the manicured lawn. The affluent guests screamed loudly, jumping out of their pristine white chairs to avoid the flying debris. I did not even flinch. I stood calmly on the stage, looking down at Jamal as he scrambled wildly in the broken glass, completely ruining his tailored suit. I reached into the sleek gift envelope I was holding and pulled out the crisp, legally verified documents. I held up the first sheet of paper for the horrified crowd to see. "This is the official police report for aggravated identity theft," I announced, my voice cutting easily through the chaotic murmurs. "And this," I continued, holding up the second document, "is a formal notification from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." Jamal did not just lose the stolen mortgage money in bad investments. He funneled it through fake shell companies to evade federal taxes. That is exactly why he spent Tuesday night sitting inside a dirty federal holding cell, and that is why every single bank account tied to my family is currently frozen by the United States government. I looked directly at Courtney, who was now sobbing hysterically in her wicker peacock chair, her hands covering her pale face. My mother was standing completely frozen near the broken table, unable to form a single sentence to defend herself. "They did not invite you here today to celebrate a new baby," I told the stunned crowd. "They invited you here to actively solicit cash gifts and thick envelopes. They are completely broke. They desperately need your generous financial donations to pay off a shady strip mall bail bondsman and to hire a criminal defense attorney to keep my father and Jamal out of federal prison for felony wire fraud. You are not guests at a baby shower today. You are the unwitting victims of a desperate legal fundraiser." The silence that followed was absolute. The wealthy neighbors, the homeowners association executives, and the country club elite stared at my family with unmasked disgust. People who had been happily sipping champagne just minutes ago were now quietly setting down their crystal glasses and reaching for their expensive purses. The carefully constructed illusion of the perfect Connecticut family was officially dead, replaced by the ugly reality of federal crimes and pathetic desperation. My family had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable financial asset. Now, they were finally experiencing the devastating consequences of their own unforgivable actions. The wealthy attendees did not wait for my mother to offer a long, drawn-out, and fake explanation to them. The sheer magnitude of the federal crimes I had just exposed was too massive to ignore or brush under the rug with a polite smile and a fake apology. Several women began walking briskly in their expensive designer high heels directly toward the garden gates, abandoning their plates of catered food and half-empty champagne flutes. The Homeowners Association president, a retired corporate lawyer who understood what a federal tax evasion investigation meant, immediately signaled to his wife to leave. They certainly did not want their family names anywhere near a messy federal subpoena today. The mass exodus had officially begun, but I was not quite finished. I slowly lowered the microphone slightly down and looked down at my silver wristwatch. The timing was truly and absolutely perfect. I raised the microphone back to my lips. "Please wait just one more moment before you rush to the valet," I called out, my voice easily stopping the fleeing guests in their tracks. They turned around, morbidly fascinated by the total destruction of a family they once envied. I turned my attention back to my mother, who was desperately gripping the edge of the broken catering table to keep herself from completely collapsing. "You also forgot to tell your guests the most important detail of the afternoon, Mom," I said smoothly. "You forgot to tell them that you do not actually own this beautiful house anymore, or the land underneath it. The bank legally reclaimed it 3 days ago without any hesitation." My mother let out a strangled gasp, her eyes darting wildly toward the massive brick colonial behind us. "That is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Richard is inside right now, fixing the paperwork. We have 60 days. You do not know what you are talking about." I shook my head slowly, feeling absolute satisfaction. "Not when the mortgage was secured through verified identity theft and felony wire fraud," I corrected her loudly. "When you steal federal funds, the standard grace period is completely voided." The bank issued an immediate notice of default. They accelerated the entire foreclosure process to protect their assets from criminals. "You are currently trespassing on bank property right now." Right on cue, a sharp, piercing wail cut through the warm afternoon air. The sound started as a distant echo, but rapidly grew louder, echoing down the suburban streets of the neighborhood. The remaining guests froze, turning their heads toward the open wrought iron garden gates. The wailing sirens were accompanied by the heavy, distinct rumble of large engines approaching fast. The private valet attendant standing out front began shouting in confusion, scrambling to move the parked luxury sedans out of the way. The heavy tires screeched against the asphalt directly outside the property line. 3 county sheriff utility vehicles abruptly turned off the main street and drove right through the open front gates. They did not park neatly in the circular driveway. Instead, the heavy black and white trucks rolled straight over the meticulously manicured front lawn, crushing Patricia's prized rose bushes beneath their thick tires. They bypassed the main house entirely and drove right onto the backyard grass, stopping just a few feet away from the pristine white catering tents. Their bright red and blue emergency lights flashed violently, casting a chaotic, strobing glare across the terrified faces of the high society guests. The sheer physical reality of law enforcement vehicles parked on the grass shattered whatever fragile composure my family had left. Courtney let out a blood-curdling scream, jumping out of her wicker peacock chair and completely abandoning the locked birdcage full of stolen cash envelopes. Jamal, still covered in spilled water and broken crystal from his humiliating fall, scrambled to his feet. His primal survival instincts kicked in, overriding any remaining shreds of his fake bravado. He looked frantically at the heavy wooden fence bordering the back of the property, clearly calculating his chances of outrunning a federal arrest warrant. The heavy metal doors of the utility vehicles swung open simultaneously. 6 heavily armed local county sheriffs stepped out onto the lawn. They were not wearing dress uniforms meant for a casual visit. They were wearing dark tactical vests, their hands resting deliberately on their heavy utility belts. The lead deputy, a tall man with a severe expression, held a thick wooden clipboard tightly in his left hand. He scanned the chaotic scene under the white catering tents, his sharp eyes quickly bypassing the panicked country club members and locking directly onto Jamal. The federal justice system had officially arrived to collect its massive debts, and there was absolutely nowhere left for my toxic family to hide today. The lead deputy stepped heavily forward, his thick boots crunching onto the broken glass and spilled water where Jamal had fallen just moments before. He raised the wooden clipboard unbothered by the collective gasp of the remaining high society guests, who were now pressing themselves against the edges of the white canvas tent. "Are you Jamal?" the deputy asked, though his tone made it clear it was not an actual question. He already had the physical description and the federal photograph. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless sound escaped his throat. He looked wildly around the garden, his eyes darting toward the open side gate, desperately calculating a frantic escape route. "Do not even think about it," the deputy warned coldly, resting his hand firmly on his utility belt. The deputy unclipped a thick stack of neon orange legal documents from his board. "I am serving a court-ordered writ of possession on behalf of the National Trust Mortgage Fraud Division," he announced, his voice booming over the whispers of the crowd. "This property has been legally reclaimed by the bank, effective immediately, due to confirmed fraudulent origination. Every single person currently standing on this lot is trespassing and must vacate the premises within the next 60 minutes. If you are not off the grass in an hour, you will be arrested." Courtney let out a sharp, hysterical wail, falling to her knees on the pristine lawn. Patricia covered her face with both hands, her diamond rings catching the strobing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. But the deputy was not finished. He dropped the orange papers onto the grass and pulled out two crisp white documents. "Furthermore, Jamal," he continued, his voice dropping an octave, "I hold an active federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are being charged with felony wire fraud conspiracy to commit bank fraud and massive federal tax evasion." Two heavily armed deputies immediately stepped past the frozen guests, flanking Jamal on both sides. They grabbed his arms with practiced, unforgiving force, twisting them sharply behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly under the canvas tent. Jamal did not fight back. The fake real estate mogul was completely broken, his shoulders slumping in absolute defeat, as the deputies began reading him his Miranda rights, in front of the very people he had just been begging for cash envelopes. "Where is Richard?" the lead deputy demanded, turning his sharp gaze toward my mother. "We have a matching federal warrant for his immediate arrest." Patricia was hyperventilating too hard to answer, but she did not need to. At that exact moment, the heavy glass patio doors at the back of the colonial house burst open. My father, Richard, sprinted out onto the wooden deck. He was no longer wearing his expensive country club polo shirt. He was wearing a rumpled travel jacket and frantically clutching a heavy leather briefcase to his chest. He had clearly seen the flashing police lights through the front windows and realized the federal government had finally caught up to his massive deception. He froze on the deck, his eyes locking onto the 6 armed sheriffs and Jamal standing in handcuffs. Panic consumed him entirely. Instead of surrendering with whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left, my father made the most pathetic and desperate decision of his life. He bolted. He threw himself off the wooden deck and sprinted across the backyard, heading blindly toward the heavy wooden fence at the far edge of the property line. "Stop right there!" a young athletic deputy shouted, immediately launching into a dead sprint after him. My father was 60 years old and spent his days riding in golf carts. He was absolutely no match for a highly trained law enforcement officer. He did not even make it halfway across the lawn. The pursuing deputy closed the distance in mere seconds, launching his body forward. He hit my father square in the back with the force of a freight train. The impact sent them both flying aggressively forward directly into the massive dessert table set up for the baby shower. They crashed violently into the wooden table legs. The entire structure collapsed under their combined weight. The towering five-tier cake, the expensive chocolate fountain, and dozens of crystal platters shattered completely. My father hit the grass hard, covered head to toe in blue frosting, melted chocolate, and dirt. His leather briefcase popped open, sending dozens of his fake legal documents flying into the wind. The young deputy quickly pinned Richard face down into the ruined cake, pulling his arms back and securing the handcuffs tightly around his wrists. "Do not move," the deputy growled, brushing chocolate off his own tactical vest. The affluent guests, the ones my parents had spent decades trying to impress, stood in a tight circle holding their smartphones, eagerly recording every single second of my father's ultimate public humiliation. The flashing lights of the smartphones illuminated my father as two deputies hauled him up from the ruined dessert table. Richard was breathing heavily, his face completely smeared with blue vanilla frosting and dark chocolate. The arrogant patriarch who had confidently toasted to his own fake generosity on Christmas Eve was now a pathetic handcuffed criminal covered in cake and dirt. He refused to look at the recording guests, hanging his head in absolute shame as the deputies marched him toward the waiting police cruisers. The sheer visual reality of Richard and Jamal standing in handcuffs finally broke the spell Courtney had been under. The fragile, stressed, expectant mother routine vanished entirely, replaced by a vicious, self-serving fury. She pushed herself up from the grass, ignoring the ruined hem of her designer maternity gown, and stomped directly over to where Jamal was being held by the officers. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not offer him a tearful goodbye. "You lied to me," Courtney screamed, her face turning a violent shade of red. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Jamal's face. "You told me the business was just having a temporary cash flow issue. You told me the bank accounts were frozen because of a clerical error. You used my parents to steal $1 million, and you lost all of it. How am I supposed to pay for the country club membership now, Jamal? How am I supposed to afford the nursery? You completely ruined my life." Jamal flinched away from her, looking utterly defeated, but the deputies did not give him a chance to answer. They forcefully guided him away from his screaming wife and shoved him into the back of the county sheriff utility vehicle. While Courtney was busy verbally destroying her arrested husband, my mother was desperately trying to salvage the final shreds of her social standing. Patricia frantically wiped the running mascara from her eyes and darted toward the edge of the tent. She intercepted the Homeowners Association president, a retired corporate attorney named Arthur, just as he was ushering his wife toward the garden gates. "Arthur, please wait," Patricia begged, grabbing the sleeve of his expensive linen suit. "You have to help us. Richard is a good man. This is all a terrible misunderstanding with the bank. Please, you know all the best defense lawyers in the city. Just write us a small bridge loan to cover the retainers. We are good for it. I promise you we are good for it." Arthur looked down at her hand, gripping his sleeve with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He firmly pulled his arm away, smoothing the wrinkled fabric. "You are not good for anything," Patricia, Arthur said, his voice dripping with icy contempt. "You committed felony wire fraud and dragged our entire neighborhood into a federal crime scene. Do not ever speak to me or my wife again." He turned his back on her and walked briskly away. The rest of the elite guests followed his lead, practically stampeding toward the valet stand. They abandoned their half-eaten catered meals, their crystal champagne flutes, and the massive pile of wrapped gifts. The illusion of my parents' perfect upper-class life was evaporating faster than the spilled champagne on the lawn. The lead sheriff stepped to the center of the ruined garden and raised a black megaphone to his mouth. "Listen up," his voice boomed, drowning out the chaotic chatter of the fleeing guests and the crying catering staff. "This property is now under the legal possession of the federal bank. You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises before you are formally charged with criminal trespassing. Leave the catering equipment, leave the gifts, grab your personal belongings, and get off the grass right now." Two deputies immediately marched up the steps of the wooden deck and entered the colonial house. Within minutes, the heavy deadbolts engaged with loud, echoing clicks. The federal eviction was absolute. The doors were locked, and the house was officially seized. Patricia stood alone in the center of the crushed rose bushes. The police cruisers containing her husband and son-in-law began backing out of the driveway, their sirens wailing into the distance. Courtney was sitting on the curb near the street, sobbing into her hands while waiting for an overpriced rideshare. The caterers were sprinting off the property. My mother slowly turned around and looked at me. She had absolutely nothing left. Her bank accounts were frozen, her husband was going to federal prison, her social circle despised her, and she was currently homeless. Tears streamed down her ruined face as she took a hesitant step toward me. "Allison," she sobbed, her voice cracking with absolute pathetic desperation. "The bank locked the doors. We cannot even get our clothes. Where are we supposed to go? You have to help us. Please." I stood perfectly still, looking at the woman who had happily forged my signature and tried to destroy my financial future just to maintain her own shallow vanity. I did not feel a single drop of empathy. I looked dead into her panicked, tear-filled eyes. "You are just guests here, Mom," I said, my voice cold, steady, and perfectly calm. "Do not overstep." I turned my back on her, adjusted the strap of my designer handbag, and walked toward the front gates. The afternoon sun felt incredibly warm on my skin. I left her standing in the ruins of her own making and never looked back. I walked down the quiet suburban street, the wailing sirens fading into a dull hum behind me, and I simply kept walking. That was exactly 6 months ago. The federal justice system, which is notoriously slow in the movies, moved with terrifying and absolute efficiency when $1.5 million of federally insured bank funds and blatant tax evasion were involved. The spectacular public implosion at the baby shower was the definitive end of my toxic family as I knew them and the immediate beginning of their new harsh reality. My father, Richard, did not get the opportunity to play the tragic victim in front of a sympathetic jury. Faced with the undeniable, crystal-clear audio recording of his own arrogant confession and a massive mountain of forged financial documents, his overworked public defender strongly advised him to surrender immediately. He pled guilty to felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The federal judge, entirely unimpressed by his former country club status and his pathetic attempts to blame the economy, sentenced him to 5 years in a federal correctional institution. The arrogant patriarch, who used to complain loudly if his expensive steak was slightly overcooked, is now wearing a standard-issue khaki uniform, eating strictly scheduled cafeteria meals, and earning 12 cents an hour scrubbing kitchen floors. His precious social reputation was completely vaporized, and his name was permanently scrubbed from the local homeowner association records. Jamal did not fare much better. The Internal Revenue Service tore through his fake real estate empire like a Category 5 hurricane. To avoid joining my father in a federal prison cell for massive tax evasion, Jamal was forced to take a brutal, uncompromising plea deal. He avoided a long prison sentence by cooperating fully and legally, liquidating every single asset he had ever touched. But the professional consequences were permanent. The state regulatory board permanently revoked his commercial real estate license, ensuring he could never legally broker a property deal again. The flashy leased Porsche was repossessed by the dealership, and his custom-tailored designer suits were sold off at a public auction to pay his fines. Today, the former real estate mogul is working a grueling minimum wage shift at a local hardware store, legally mandated to hand over 70% of his meager paychecks directly to the federal government for criminal restitution. He will be paying off that stolen money for the rest of his natural life. Without Jamal's stolen funds or my father's fraudulently obtained credit, the luxurious suburban fantasy completely collapsed for the women of the family as well. Courtney and Patricia were forced to abruptly vacate the foreclosed Connecticut estate with only the clothes they could quickly stuff into cheap plastic garbage bags. The country club immediately revoked their elite memberships due to unpaid dues and the highly public scandal. Courtney, who had spent her entire adult life treating me like a disposable automated teller machine and bragging endlessly about her superior social status, was finally introduced to the real world. Stripped of her designer clothes and her luxury vehicle, she moved into a cramped, noisy two-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. With a new baby to feed and a husband making minimum wage, she was forced to do the one thing she swore she would never do. She got a job. The entitled woman who demanded a $10,000 check for a custom nursery is now working 40 hours a week scanning groceries at a local discount supermarket, clocking in and out just to keep the lights on. My mother lives on their uncomfortable stained living room sofa, entirely stripped of her diamond rings, and forced to babysit while her favorite daughter works the cash register. As for me, the narrative took a drastically different turn. I am sitting at the custom granite island of my beautiful newly purchased downtown townhouse. The morning sun pours through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the quiet, peaceful space I bought entirely on my own merits. I take a slow sip of my black coffee, enjoying the rich, bitter blend. I open my laptop and log into my secure financial portal, running a routine check on my personal data. The screen loads instantly. My credit score sits at a pristine, flawless 820. The fraudulent mortgage has been permanently wiped from my history, leaving my financial identity completely bulletproof. My cell phone buzzes softly on the granite counter. The screen lights up, displaying a notification that a blocked number has just left a voicemail. I know exactly who it is. It is likely my mother calling from a cheap prepaid phone wanting to cry about her ruined life, or Courtney desperately demanding money for her rent. A year ago, I would have answered. I would have listened to their toxic guilt trips and reached for my wallet to keep the peace. Today, I do not even unlock the screen. I simply swipe left and hit delete. The notification vanishes into the digital void, leaving my phone screen entirely blank. I close my laptop, take another sip of my coffee, and smile into the quiet, sunlit room. The suffocating weight I carried for 33 years is completely gone. The screen fades to black on a woman who finally took back her life.